Hello and welcome to Heart of the Matter, where it's an honour to have Amed join me and also Jay. And yeah, we're going to have a wonderful discussion today about the inner child. I can't remember the other two now. It's gone.
The
inner child,
undiscovered self.
That's it. And the other one was about the
active imagination.
Active imagination. That's it. And that just my brain. Yeah. So this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And yeah, I just hope that the listeners will get something out of it. And as always, it's an honor to have you here. And if you can, try and check out Amed's channel, which is Planetary Intelligence, and Jay Ryan has his own website, which is the Human Remedy. Is that right, Jay?
That's correct.
Yeah. But there's sort of the alkalinity stuff in that as well. Yeah, great. Well, honor to have you both here, brothers. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So who wants to fire away first? Who wants to share? This is a quite big discussion.
Well, when we approach the whole subject, I think the inner child is something that's been, discussed before. It's not like, we're the first to ever talk about it. But, Carl Jung was the first to ever give it a definition and a term, which is the inner child archetype. And he knew that it represented and he said, even in his books and his works, that it's a significant part and turning point in the path of individuation. So the child archetype, or what's termed as the innocent child archetype, is it allowed the individual to enhance his or her connection to their own history, and also recalling childhood experiences and events, because these events affect us as adults, which we call, the Oedipus stages in our lives, which is the essential parts between 0 and 7. So, I mean, even every culture has an innocent child archetype. If we look into cultures as well, other cultures, there's a definite sort of significance to this worldwide. It's not something that's just in the Western world. So yeah, I mean, this all relates again to the shadow, because the shadow is created from the repression and the way up, because all this psychological stuff that happens in us is to do with our upbringing. And the shadow is created once the child starts to separate their psyche from their true self. And this is done by, the parent rejecting the child. So you have an expression and your mother or your father shuts it down from the get-go. And you see that these memories are very hard to access because the shadow is in the way of that experience, because it's trauma. And trauma, causes the shadow to appear in a way, in my opinion, because trauma is the instigator of separation within ourselves. So, if you are not validated, because the innocent child archetype wants to be loved and accepted. If that nourishing, because when we talk about the divine or the love that we receive, that's unconditional. You're created, and love should be given to you as a default. It's like automatic. It should be there. But because of the traumas of our own parents, what happens is that we don't receive that love. We don't receive it, then the love becomes conditional, which is actually not real love. It becomes a transactional thing. So then the child learns that they have to create a certain persona for them to be loved. And we've seen those children, haven't we? The perfect children that always appear, and they're always doing everything perfectly to get the approval of their parents. you know, and they all act all, you know, all perfect, when you can see it's so fake. For those who are with eyes that are open can see. So you can see that trauma play out in the behavior of that child, you know.
It's quite cultural as well, ain't it?
Oh yeah,
culture has a big part to play with that.
Yeah, culture is massive. Yeah, it's good that you brought up culture, Jay, because there's different cultural upbringings, but the result is still the same, right? So for example, in Middle Eastern culture, in my background, for example, you'll have do as I say, don't do as I do. You know, you can see clearly the parent is doing it but telling you not to do it while they're doing it themselves. And they'll use, for example, hitting, physical abuse, as a form of way of controlling and causing that trauma and separation. Where in the West, it's more emotional. It's actually abandonment. They won't give you love, or they'll scream and shout at you for not. I'm not saying that happens all the time in Western culture, because there are parents that do hit their children behind closed doors, but it's more prevalent in Middle Eastern culture, for example, in comparison to Western culture, where in the Western world, it's more about what you're saying. So it becomes a more of an emotional, mental trauma, as opposed to a more physical one. Yeah, and that again, it comes back to focusing on the hostility. Let's just talk about hostility for a minute, because that's what rejection is. And that this is something that Alexander Lowen, for those who haven't heard of him, he's one of the sort of disciples of Wilhelm Reich. And I know a lot of people know Wilhelm Reich to be Mr. Orgon accumulator guy, but the man was a fantastic student of psychology, and he's got a lot of psychological books that are out. He was a psychologist first before he became a before he got into the orgon and the invention of the orgon. Also a student of Freud, same as Carl Jung, but obviously he went his own way away from Freud. He didn't agree about the death complex, I think he called it. But anyway, just going back to hostility. So I've got a quote here that I've prepared. So like, he says that rejection is an intolerable situation for a child. In itself, the frustrated longing for love is extremely painful, but the consequent sense of being unlovable and the conclusion that it must be due to some fault or failure in oneself is devastating. The child sees no way out of this impossible situation than to accept the offer of specialness and intimacy. So wow. It's very powerful, that one for me. Yeah, it really hit home.
I was just about to say that it really sort of hit me in my heart that when I heard that.
Yeah, because that rejection, they want to be special, right? Then you want to be special, and in order to be accepted by a parent and be special, and to receive that intimacy, because that intimacy is also in a way unauthentic, even from the parent. So it becomes a perpetual, I mean, it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking, because the child is seeking love. And what they do is they act special and become special, so the parent can give them approval, so they receive that love. But the love that they're given and that they receive is not real love, because it's conditioned. It's a conditional acceptance based on their specialness, that they have to behave in a certain way to receive it. Because the child is innocent.
Because by special, that means pretty much being something they're not, or trying to be something more than they are.
Yeah. And that's when you talk about separation, Jay, that's the separation, because then the persona gets created. And this is how narcissism, by the way, starts as well in the narcissist. See, not all narcissists, not narcissists are not born narcissists. Sociopaths are not born sociopaths, right? They're born that way because of the way the parent treats them. And by the way, just so you know, as a statistic, most sociopaths and narcissists, right, most of them have absent fathers. So get your head around that one, you know. But yeah, going back to that, it's that because that's the persona, the image of self, which is not the true self, gets created. So your sense of self is based on a persona and an image of yourself, not your true self, because you're disconnected from that from childhood. Your true expression is not coming out. You know, when we talk about astrology, your true expression when you're born, the way you're born, under the star sign you're born, the time you're born, where the planets are aligned, everything, there is a divine thing that comes in, and that's your life. It comes from it's born out of that, and that's a unique expression of you, because the configuration of the planets and the stars are a unique expression of the timing you were born at. You know, it's like a unique fingerprint. And you know, that if you're not watered, it's like a plant. If it's not watered, no plant is the same, by the way. If you look at plants in nature, none of them are the same exactly. They're identical, but there will be something that differentiates them. You know, same thing as human beings. So it's like, well, if that's suppressed from the get-go, from the moment you're as a baby, okay, you're cute, you're given that love in the beginning because of the vulnerability. But if the parent already is in the state of, because they'll look at you as an innocent baby, but there's still words being exchanged between the mother and the father. There's still things going on in that relationship, and that's affecting the baby. In fact, it's already affecting you in the womb with how even the mother relates to herself. This is going back to Otto Rank, you know, and some of the discoveries he made about like how, you know, you're already being affected once you're already in the womb. Forget being born, you're already being affected there. And if there's unhealthy relationship going on with the mother within herself, if there's an unhealthy relationship between the mother and the father while she's pregnant, that's already, that information and that energy is going into the womb. What she's eating, what she's putting in it, all of it affects you before you're even born into the world, you know. So yeah, these things have to be addressed, because for the inner child to truly awaken within us, we cannot access the undiscovered self, the true self. We cannot access the imagination, because all those repressions and trauma causes the imagination to not flourish. And the imagination is intrinsically linked to the anima itself. So we cannot integrate our anima as men until we deal with these issues. You have to go back to childhood to undo these traumas and do the shadow work for the shadow in us to become the wise old man, you know. So if you're and pay attention to your dreams, you know, if your shadow is appearing as this muscular, young, aggressive type man is treating you in a disrespectful way, that's your shadow. That's not being integrated properly, you know. And until that shadow appears as a wise old man, your shadow's not integrated, you know. So but you'll see the stages sometime. I mean, I had a dream not too long ago, just to share, where my shadow appeared as Hulk Hogan. Don't know if you remember
Wow.
WWF.
Yeah.
You know, the wrestler Hulk, the famous, you know, the hammer mustache that he had. So he appeared as an old man, but he had a very young body. So it showed to me that my shadow still, it's getting there, because he's turned into an old man, but he's still got this muscular sort of physique, which I don't know what it means. He still has a young body. He has a young body, but an old face. So he's almost there, if that makes sense. You know, it's almost integrated. But it is, you'll see different stages of your shadow appear in your dreams. So pay attention to that. So yeah, that's the thing about the inner child. So is there anything you want to add, Jay?
So when you was talking about the trauma that you receive as a child, I had an image of a comedian kid, because they're not accepted for who they are, but they'll say something that was funny, and everyone's around them when they're joking and laughing. But when they're not joking and laughing and talking about their own life or anything serious, no one's with them. It's cold, very, very cold. So they will keep joking to the point where they start lying. And or even the lies probably come first, but the lies, people like the lies and entertainment. So they were never able to deal with themselves or even be themselves, because they're holding so much separation within their own self. So, but they are using creativity, which is interesting. Which is that part of imagination? What do you think of that? Exploiting your own creativity in a way.
Yeah, I mean, Steiner talks about the imagination being developed between the ages of 0 and 7. So it's not that the imagination isn't active during those stages. That is when it's most active, because it's the what they call the theta stage. The theta is the hypnosis, the hypnotic state of our development. So that's when we're able to tap into the imagination. Everything is magical if you pay attention to children. They're always having, you know, they turn mud pies into pies, you know, everything they take, they create into their imagination, and they believe it's real tea. And when they're having, you know, their cups of tea or whatever, they're emulating the adults. So that imagination is there, it's active, but what happens is it gets killed as they develop into teenagers and into adults. So if that's, Steiner talks about it, if it's not developed, that's why they say do not awaken the intellect until they're after the age of 7. So if you're teaching them things about the world, it's too early. What they need to be is in a state of play and fun and imagination. If you interfere as an adult and say, you know, no, go and do this, go and do that, you're awakening their intellect. You know, if, you know, a lot of say, oh, good, disgusting anyway. But, you know, religious parents, for example, they'll tell their kids about God and get them to pray from the age of 4. You know, that's the worst thing to do, because you're interfering with that imagination. You're already imprinting your worldviews and your interpretation of God into your child without allowing that self-discovery to happen within them. And when you do that, you awaken their intellect. And when their intellect is awakened, the imagination is suppressed, the animal goes. So the animal goes. And yeah, this is something that's sad. But yeah, like you said, the imagination is there for sure. You know, it's just that it gets killed, sadly.
That's the thing. The separation in oneself makes you really cold inside, really cold. And I've seen it as well. A lot of people, they seek for validation other than their own, if that makes sense. Which is interesting. That's got to do with early programming and all the traumas that are placed onto them. Because I think a child doesn't really have any traumas, in sense of probably just childbirth, I'd say, depending on how that works. But all the traumas, I feel like everyone's a child, and as you grow up and become an adult, traumas are placed onto you. No, don't do this. No, don't do that. Become like this. So these are words that are coming from outside. You have to learn how to be an adult, but you're always a child, if that makes sense. So even when you're old and then you're like, you know what? I can't do this and I can't do that. You become a kid again, because you're no longer holding that image that you've created through trauma. What's come to you. I feel like it's you're taught to be an adult, but you're always a child. I'd say.
Yeah, yes. And that's the super ego as well. Again, that talking, the outside, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. That's the super ego being given a voice. And that's how the superego develops, because it is the opinion of your parents, it is the opinion of teachers, it is the opinion of society that shapes your superego. And then you start to identify with the voice of the collective. And that's why most people live in that voice of the collective. They're actually not selves. They're mostly you know, and the ego is shaped that way. Then the ego serves the superego, where the ego should be serving the self, the soul. So you know, that's the sad, you know, common story of our times, you know, in terms of where we are psychologically in ourselves and where most people are. And that's why they're so easy to control, because they're so in their superego, so controlled by that voice of the collective that they don't even question it. It's like they because it's the only way they be accepted, and that's the way they were taught since childhood.
That makes sense. Also, I think I've seen as well, you feed somebody doubt who already is in a separated state, and then they start feeding themselves doubt, so they defeat themselves. You'd only say it once to them and they will keep saying it to themselves. Even what I noticed when I was quite young was I would use the word should. I should do this and I should do that, right? And then I noticed something. Every time I said the word should, I felt completely defeated and separated, like I wasn't me, or there was no past of me and there was no future of me, because nothing can be done. So I changed the word should into could, and then I was there. Like, oh, I should go out means nothing. It separates the mind. Whereas I could go out. Now I've got the actual power to go wherever I want, however I want to, because I can now make a choice. So even in the language as well, the language that we use, that causes a lot of separation if you're not paying attention to what you're saying and thinking, which probably has a lot to do with subduing your own inner child just by the language you're using. Yeah.
Oh, that absolutely makes sense, Jay, because you know, from my experience, you know, and what I've been through over the years, and how we talk to ourselves in our minds and stuff and all that, that really makes sense. You know, it's like the other day, you know, it's just all this stuff, baggage, you know, that we accumulate over the years, and I'm seeing that whole realizations of that baggage, insecurities and so forth, you know, that's been placed upon us, all this stuff. And so what you're saying, just for me, makes sense, because it's helping me to move forward and to shed this stuff that's just not who I really am, you know. And so, you know, another thing, you know, I said to myself and to a friend of mine was, be kind to yourself. You know, be kind to yourself, you know, because we can be our own worst critics. And I've learned that, you know. So I'm learning that a lot more, to be kind to myself. And that's a good step forward for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key is also, to approach it with love, because you if you haven't been given that love since childhood, you have to start to mother and father yourself. And this is the thing that will help you to integrate the self and integrate the shadow, because the self is more of a peeling away, as an unlayering of all the trauma. The more you layer away, take away the layers, you get to the inner child. The inner child is the true self, really, because they're one and the same. It's just that the archetype has to be used, because we need the innocent archetype, you know, because guilt is something that's imposed upon us. It's not something that actually exists. Guilt only happens because of the disconnection of self, or the disconnection of the inner child, you know, and that guilt weighs on your conscience. And the thing is that because your conscience is the voice of your morality. You know, they say guilty conscience. Well, the reason you got a guilty conscience is because you're abusing yourself, and you're disconnecting, separating, and you're not listening to the voice of your conscience, which is the voice of the inner child, which is the voice of what you could call even God, you know, because that conscience is there in us to know right from wrong. And if that voice is interfered with, and that connection to that voice is interfered with, you can't even know what morality is, what right from wrong is. You know, everything becomes upside down. And you know, just going back, there's a quote by Arthur Janov, because I was watching or listening to a podcast by Michael Tsarian on Unslaved, called Malignant Narcissism and Authentic Shadow Work. There was a quote that really, really got to me as well. So going just back to the womb, because we have to know that this is something that's not just on a mental level. This is also something on a physical level, on a spiritual level, on different levels. But let's just address the physical, because those are one of the first things that happens to us. Our bodies are formed before we even come into this world. So if you leave out the physical, you leave it out in your own peril. So Arthur Janov says events in the womb stamp in forever key alterations in hormones, immune functions, neurotransmitters, and nerve circuits. This is no longer simply an assumption. This is something that scientists have already discovered, but sadly is never made, you know, widely known in our education. That those things, your nervous system is shaped that way. It's already shaped in the womb. Your physical appearance is due to the way your parents and your mother nurtured you in the womb. You know, you see people come out in physical deformations because that deformedness is to do with what poisons the mother's put into her body, you know, through you know what we know as gene therapy now. Let's just give it that name for now, or needle craft, so to speak, and various other you know, toxic foods, and let alone the speaking that's going on, the internal dialogue of the mother, the influence of the mother's family, the all those things affect the shaping and the form of the child. So already your nervous system is getting wired in a certain way based on the way she's relating her outer world to her inner world. And that's forming the child she's creating in her womb, you know, let alone the seed that you got from your father and what was going on in his head and his, you know, it's all related, it's all connected. So you know, and we're undoing this by talking about it, because by speaking about it, we're helping ourselves, but also our listeners, to gain perspective on the importance of the connection of the inner child, and how important and how divine actually the inner child is.
Mm-hmm. So inner child is key. That's what I'd say in life. I feel so. Otherwise, it's just a complete disconnection. And you're lost. Because when you're a child, you know you're a child, you're there. So
yeah. It also, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. I've sort of had a bit of a reflection back to my childhood. You're just living in the moment as well. Mm-hmm. You know, you're just living in the moment. It's just so, yeah, the innocence is there, you know. Yeah.
And that innocence is trampled upon by society and our parents, and their traumatized state. And again, it like going back to shadow work, because that separation is created in the child because they want to be approved and loved. Mm-hmm. The shadow gets created, so they're repressing their true self. And the moment you repress that, the self itself then feels betrayed. So your conscience is betrayed. You betray, ultimately, you betray that essence of you that's true, in a way you betray God, you betray everything that's holy, you know, or the source, whatever you want to call it or label it as, you know, you betray it. You betray that connection to divinity and to authenticity, because you've repressed then. That repression of the self creates the shadow in turn.
I feel like the truth is you can only be you. No one else can be you. So if you're not you,
who are you?
Yeah, who are you? No one's you. So as long as you're you, that's all that's needed.
Yeah.
So the acting and the separation and it's trauma related as well, like you were saying, through upbringing, but it could also be reversed over time. You can deal with it. Every step of your life can work towards reconnecting with how you used to be as a kid. And I do believe that also starts with an imagination of reminding yourself how you were as a kid. Remembering the trauma as well that you went through, and actually feeling what you should have felt as a kid, rather than acting like it's not happening and becoming cold. Because if you don't feel, then you're not you. That's how I feel, because we sense everything, don't we? So if we're disconnecting from our own senses, then we can't truly feel, and then we become numb. So trauma. Yeah.
That's absolutely, yeah. I mean, as you're saying that, Jay, I totally get that, you know, from my own experiences, you know, and it does, you know, times your heart feels like it's completely been shut off, completely numbed and completely shut off. So yeah, what you're saying is yeah, it really, that speaks to many volumes.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, people think that the self, there's a location to it. The self isn't a location, it's a being. It's a beingness. It's feeling everything, seeing everything, seeing you in relation to the world, how you relate to the world, but you're ever present with yourself while you're interacting with the world. If that presence isn't there, you're not feeling it, you're not sensing people. And not only that, you're not influenced by the collective or by individuals who are part of the collective. You're not influenced by that. And that is to do with our relationship to men and women, you know, because the self is imperial, it's empiric. There is nothing in terms of there is a self-sufficiency about it, but also it only has a receptivity to love. So if there is nothing loving happening in the interaction, the self doesn't really engage. It knows where to put the boundaries in that sense. In relationships, I mean, this is what we're talking about in intimate relationships, because the self won't stand for it, won't stand for it at all. And, you know, and it's that connection with your essence, with who you are, and going on that path of individuation to discover who you truly are by addressing the traumas, because it's the undoing of the shadow. It's the integration of the shadow. It's the integration of the anima in males, and in women it's the animus, you know, but the shadow is present in both men and women, of course. And also getting to that inner child, like Jay said, really important. Go to that trauma. Go to the trauma that you experienced. Try to remember what it felt like to be shut down and rejected by your parents, you know. And once you address how you should have felt at the time, you're able to then do that shadow work and integration. Because what Wilhelm Reich talks about, it should also be a physical, visceral experience of that trauma, to relive it, but react in it in the way you should have, to stand up for the self and honor the self, as opposed to shut it down, repress it, and then create a persona in order to get the approval and love of the parent. You know, so going to those difficult places that we don't want to face and see, because and for most people it's very painful. It's a very painful thing, you know, there's pain involved, but you know, it's like, well, you're not going to gain the self without the pain. I know it's cliche, no pain no gain, but it is true in this case. It is. You have to go through that pain, experience it, feel it, but also once you've seen the trauma, you know, let it be a part of you, because when you reject it, you're creating the shadow again, you know. So it's about accepting that happened to you, and then that becoming a part of who you are, not in the victim sense of way, but in a way like you've experienced that trauma, you've faced it, and then you've accepted it. And once you've accepted it, you accept then the integration of your shadow, because then you're no longer that disconnection of self. Does that make sense? So you're then at one with yourself in that way. There's no more internal separation going on, you know.
Finding that sort of balance with us. Yeah, balance. Yeah, yeah. It's a very deep subject, but one that's is needed to be talked about for sure.
I mean, look at this is why like martial arts for me has been an integral part of my recovering from my trauma, because I know it definitely has helped me recover from my trauma, because I've addressed it's allowed me to feel. Because sometimes when you do physical, like forget the gym, that's mechanical. There's nothing, you know, in the gym that's going to give you recovery from your traumas, because most of these people is what Wilhelm Reich talks about. It's called armoring. You see these guys with big muscles, they're just armoring their trauma. They're creating an armor, physical armor around their trauma. A lot of these men are very hurt, super sensitive, deeply wounded children.
Yeah.
So they create this armoring around their bodies to look so big and strong. And you've seen them. I mean, we've seen in lockdown. I mean, they're all muzzled up. Most of them anyway. You know, there goes your manhood. So much for your muscles, you know. It goes to show it's not all about, you know, so that armoring is also created. Yeah, exactly, Jay. It's all in the mind. So it's same thing with women. Look at the girls. I mean, what do? They're wounded teenagers. There's all these insecurities going on in the woman, but they have to look pretty. They have to look pretty. They turn up pretty every day. Isn't that a form of armoring? You know, I'm not saying that that's wrong. What I'm trying to say is, how much of you are you hiding behind your makeup and your consumerism that the consumerist culture gives you as a woman? You know, how much of our wounded inner child goes out and buys stuff in order to satiate the hole that's in us? You know, the next Gucci bag, the Louis Vuitton, all this, because everybody else is getting it. You're trying to satiate something in yourself through getting all these physical, material things. Isn't that a form of armoring? You're layering all these material things on top of yourself. Aren't you armoring yourself from your true wounded inner deep wounds? Because you're trying to satiate this endless hunger that you can't satisfy.
Yeah.
There's an old saying as well. It's about you just came to me actually as you're saying all this. It's about putting a brave face on. That gets told quite a lot. Put a brave face on, you know, and all this. And again,
such a British thing, you know.
Yes, isn't it? Yeah, put a brave face on, you know.
Yeah.
But again, it's just really think about it. It's just rubbish, you know. So yeah. I
always say culture is the cult you are.
Yeah.
So culture is a collectivism. There is nothing individualistic about culture at all.
Cult sounds a lot like cold as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Definitely. Yeah, it's this sort of disconnection and coldness in to ourselves that we create, and it manifests in the way we live our lives. You know, when you're on your own, do you feel lonely and abandoned? Do you need to feel something when you're on your own? Then you're in bad company, my friend. You're in bad company. So it's something that you have to address there, you know, because solitude is completely different. There's no lunacy in it. Solitude is you're a full solar self. You're warm, you're complete, you're whole. And then through that, you're able to enjoy your own company. And in that way, you're able to then attract healthy relationships into your life in turn, you know, and healthy people, because you know where your boundaries are with people, because you're a self. Yourself won't stand for anything less. If an immoral person comes into your life, you're like, nope, cut it off, because that's they're going to come and poison and corrupt your life, you know. And there's something as well about how people who are individuated and you know, integrated with themselves somehow attract toxic people like narcissists and cold people, because in a way you represent their conscience. But what do they do with that? They shut you down. They crucify you. You're out most of the time. But that every time that someone like that enters their life, who is a self, that's them giving them the opportunity to heal. And if they're not allowing that individual and humbled before that individual, and like I said, 99% of the time they're shut down and crucified totally, you know.
The answer is within them, within everybody.
Yeah.
That's where you need to seek. If you're seeking it externally, it's best to learn it and take it internally so you can actually do what you need to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, the external is an opportunity. If you meet somebody that is integrated and sane, let's just say, at least, you know, sane and is wise and has that wisdom of self and that knowledge of self, then they won't know it, because they're not consciously aware, because they're unconscious. They're running unconscious programs. But sometimes the unconscious manifests that, and if they're not paying attention, that person will trigger their shadow. Will trigger them. They'll get angry. They'll start to get upset, because you are representing that, which is what they're after. And it's their opportunity to interact with their triggers. So they can integrate internally. The external becomes internal because they're learning externally. That's how shadow work works. Who's triggering you? Who's triggering you to get upset and angry? Because that is your opportunity to learn about your shadow. You're getting angry and triggered because you haven't integrated that in yourself. There's something there that needs to be addressed. So, you know, it's like people, for example, when it comes to about masks, for example, you know, if you tell them about the masks, tell them that they don't work, you know, you show them the science, which is clear as day. You know, you can show them everything. You bring them the biggest proof, they still won't believe you. Why? Because they'll get triggered. Their shadow is not, their shadow is the issue. They haven't integrated their shadow. So they'll get triggered saying, you don't know nothing, you know?
And you also get that deniability. I remember showing someone a video. They got a fog machine to a mask. All the smoke went through. And it's like, so if the smoke goes through, everything gets through. And it was like, yeah, I know, but I'm still going to wear it anyways. I was like, okay. So disconnecting from their own knowledge, disconnecting from what they know. which is another form of probably trauma, where someone's saying you might know something, but you're not accepted. Your truth ain't accepted here. So take your truth somewhere else, or shut it down and join us. Listen to what I'm telling you. Well, that's it. Yeah. That's how they receive their love as well. Or was it intimacy? Intimacy. Yeah.
Intimacy. Yeah. And specialness. They won't feel special because they're not being accepted by the collective. And yeah.
Listen to me, do it my way, and you get a pay rise. You do it your way, and you lose a job.
Yeah. Again, yeah. I mean, another saying, you know, which is the teacher will appear when the student is ready, and you know, that's one of the things that I've had happen to me in my life. You know, yeah, it's like you said, you can show all the proof that you can, but there's still something that just gets in the way up here, isn't there? You know, yeah, it's yeah, I mean,
it's a traumatized self again.
Yeah,
that's what gets in the way. It's the shadow gets in the way all the time, every time. The shadow gets in the way. You're not actually speaking to an individual self. You're speaking to somebody who's dead to themselves. You know, they appear alive. They have but they're acting out of the self-image, which is their persona, which we've got created through the trauma.
I kind of want to add as well, there's a social form of conditioning as well, in terms of uniforms, where even, for example, I was doing media, somebody saw me and it was like, it was versus me versus somebody else who had glasses and looked like they was techie. I could do a lot more than them, but they chose to go with them and completely regretted it. And then it was just like, oh, because I didn't look like how I did media, because they had this sort of stereotype. And it's the same with even science. If you see somebody with a white lab coat, some people just automatically accept everything they're saying, just through the social conditioning, as if you have that coat, the message will get in and you have to accept it no matter what, for whatever reason. And it's probably the same with shirt and tie. It depends on the actual dressing, so to speak, but that also has a part to play, I'd say, in traumas and denying oneself and taking on things from others, whether they be doubts, grief, fear, lies, disconnection. Yeah.
It's uniformitarianism, I think they call it. You know, there's this thing about what's in the collective as an image projection. So, like you said, if they look the part, then they're the part. And also, you got to remember, we were wearing uniforms in public schools, right? So that conditioning is already happening, that a certain character has to wear a certain outfit to be the part, you know, the whole shirt and tie. You know, it's funny, the whole the tie thing is the imagery and the idea of the tie itself is really, it's a leash. You know, I always call it a leash, you know, because it's the corporate enslaved one. You know, the whole thing about ties. That's why I stopped wearing ties. But that's just a personal view on that sort of thing. Although it's a nice looking thing to wear. But yeah, it's yeah, uniformitarianism, and that kind of comes into the whole thing about you know, Bolshevism and communism, and why people are so lefty these days as well, and woke, right? The whole woke culture. So yeah, it's all related, but also you get this this fakeness, right, about people. Alexander Lowen also talks about, so the typical facial expression, like let's talk about like the masochist, for example. You know, what is a masochist? Because you get some people that love pain, right? But the reason they love pain is because they're in pain. A masochist is somebody who is in pain, not who desires pain or gets off on pain. They're in pain. That's also another form of armoring, by the way. When we talk about the Reichian view of psychology, that's armoring too. They need all the pain and the pain stories. So masochist is not obvious, by the way, to most people. A lot of the masochists are in pain in general. Their story about themselves is all about pain. And that could be manifest in diseases, illnesses as well in the body. They're always in pain. They're in the arthritis, for example, is another form of masochism that's going on in them, because that's their story that they tell themselves, the victimized self, I'll call it, the masochist. And the Alexander Landon says that the typical facial expression of the masochist is one of innocence or naivety. And this may take the form of a wide-eyed innocence, good-natured smiling, or an expression of grinning stupidly. Underneath is the fear, the contempt, the expression of disgust, and even deeper, the frightened child. You know, so these complexes of masochists and narcissists and sociopaths. I mean, I'm talking about the more extreme versions, but we have very subtle versions of those people around us all the time.
Something I've noticed as well in terms of the undiscovered self and the inner child is the labels change who you are. Because I remember a kid who was absolutely fine, but the second they said, oh, you may have dyslexia, or you may have this, or you may have autism, then they started acting like they did, and they started using that as a shield. Like you said, as an armory, they had it, and then they use it for attention. They use it to get away with things. They use it because when they start using that act, they get accepted. And then they really did turn out that way when I knew them the whole time before, and they weren't like that. But only when it was labeled did it manifest within their trauma psyche, because maybe they took it a certain type of way, which is interesting in terms of how you split as a kid. They're just labels. They don't define you, you define yourself. You pick your left foot, right foot, left foot. So how can someone tell you you're this and that when they don't see where you're walking? They've never seen where you've walked. They can't tell you. These labels, yeah. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. We all go through phases.
It comes back to the hurt and the fear, doesn't it? It's all, you know, just kind of going back a bit from that quote as well, and what you're talking about. So even when Alexander Lowen, he was getting you know, his clients coming in, he goes, even in their clinical experience is shown beneath the vicious persona of violent and even destructive people is a great deal of inarticulated hurt, with the fear of still further emotional injury. So he was saying that he says that I was fully aware from my clinical experience with clients who had committed serious violent acts that a lack of regret for their behavior was bonded to their severe early psychological trauma. An exploration of their histories revealed that each of the offenders that I treated became violent to inure against some great suffering. So that also in the other sense, Jay. So you can have the one that jokes and wants to be the center of the room and attention, and be accepted every time they create a joke. Well, yeah, on the other side, you have the violent ones, the really violent ones, who are also just the same in that sense, because they're hiding some sort of deep suffering, and they have to play it out externally to find some sort of release or temporary release for that tension that they hold within themselves, of that suffering. You know, I'm reminded of the Joker, the character of the Joker, in this sense as well. You know, all that tension that he's building up through the trauma that he's experienced eventually came to a point of a violent act, which needed to happen for him to find relief from it all. But the sad thing is that it's only a temporary relief. It's not addressing the inner issue of healing that inner child, that wounded inner child. So yeah, it's all related to all these different personalities, whether they're violent or joking or comedic, you know, which is funny because it relates to the Joker character as well.
Both of them.
Which, you know, I think we discussed about this before, that at some point I think me and you're going to try and do a breakdown on the Joker, the latest version of that, because there's so much good psychological stuff in there to talk about and to take apart and share. So we'll have to do that at some point for sure. Yeah, it's very very compared to all the other, you know, Joker films, Batman films or whatever, you know, that for me is really a film that really psychologically wise, you know, there's so much stuff you can take from that. And you know, there's almost, you know, you see certain things where you almost think, you know, he's almost at that point where he could have come out the hero, he could have come out the other side of it, but he didn't, and it allowed the whole shadow self to emerge and do what it did within that film, and he ended up the way that it ended up. I mean, you know, it's just an amazing film for people to watch. If they haven't watched it, I suggest to go and watch it, because you know, I got so much out of that film. So
even whoever made that has a very active imagination.
For sure.
For sure. I mean, that is, it's only through that healing are you able to bring out the inner artist. In fact, the active imagination is so important, because it's that if you want to find one form of outlet to heal trauma, is using art and creativity. It's a form of release. Again, anything that releases the tension, you know, that's suppressed within you, then, you know, what better than the imagination? What better than the imagination? Whether you're a writer, whether you're a painter, an artist, you know, a musician, you know, that those forms of expression.
Martial arts.
Martial
arts, dancer. There's so much things, so many things.
Because
so
it is, it's a form. It's an energy, and it's like you know, I understand that, because it's very easy to take that energy and project it onto somebody else, when actually you could turn that energy and, like you said, use it through creativity of whatever that may be, to release that energy in a good, healthy way.
So I always see that energy as an unlimited source you can always tap into. It's only when you start harvesting yourself, or you start doing things not honest, if that makes sense. If you separate yourself within the creativity, then that's when it's not as creative as it's supposed to be. So, but it's unlimited. Once you're in alignment with that energy, it's everlasting. Every second, every day.
Flow, isn't it? It's a state of flow. If that's not coming out, then it will be expressed in a very, if that's not coming out in that state of flow when you are creating and being creative, whether you are dancing, whether you are painting, writing, if that's not in that state of flow, then what you're doing is actually just contrived. There's nothing authentic about it. Then you're trying to force it, you see, and then there becomes a fakeness in that creativity, and it's not really genuine. Because if you've noticed, the real true work, there's, when you look at certain things, whether it's paintings or whether it's you know, words, there's a genuine expression, and it triggers people. You'll see it. And if it's not giving you a reaction as a work of art, for example, or a piece of writing, if it's not invoking any emotion, it's not invoking any sort of feeling, really, then that art is failed. It's a failed art. You know, that's how I always distinguish between authentic art and fake art, because there's so much fart out there. It's the best way I can describe it. Fake art.
Beautifully put.
That's
great.
So
but I mean, I get that. You should give some sort of emotional reaction, if it's whatever it may be, you know. art or poetry, music, whatever it may be, you know, yeah, that's what it should do. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, harboring, I mean, again, honing the imagination, honing it. It's like a muscle. Yes. Yeah, definitely. So again, it's a practice to sit down and access that creative flow. And for me, I need to be alone to do that. When I do my poetry or my writing or my music, I need to disconnect from everything. Maybe sometimes music will evoke that in me. So I'll be listening to music and I'll allow myself to access that flow state, that creative state in me, that creative inner child, that active imagination. And then from that, I can create, you know, ideas come from there. You know, ideas are born in that state. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be those things, you know, like I love creating something I created recently, which is like crystals in a log that holds tea lights, you know, stuff like that. The ideas of stuff like that, creating some things with your hands, you know, because it is physical. Psychosoma, again, it goes back to psychosomatic. It's something that has to come out into the physical world. Otherwise, the imagination, well, what's the use of it if you're not putting it out into the world, if you're not creating something out of it? You know, we are creative beings, and creation never ends. So it is always creative. And if we're not creative, then there's something dead in us. That's the way I see it. You know, so.
But it's also good, I feel, to take in creative works, like you said, have art move you and all these things. Because even me, when I was young, I used to play computer games, and you're there, you're creating stuff, you're spending money, you're doing all these things in the game. But once that game's off, everything's just done. You see, because that world was created, but it's not in this world, if that makes sense. It's not your world. So when you start truly living in your world, there's no separation, so to speak. Yeah, I'm sort of saying how it's good to take in creative pieces of thinking to inspire you, so you can then go on to create things that are much more amazing. So yeah, a lot of things, music as well. Music is very moving, very touching, and invokes your own expression of you. You feel different from everyone else. Not everybody feels the same as you when they hear the music. So that feeling is about accepting how you feel with the music and not seeking, someone else's opinion. How do you feel about it? And then imprinting the way you see it. Is you feel however you feel. And it's about tapping into that feeling, because that's you. That's your inner child. That feels all the time. So yeah,
there's a sacredness about it as well, isn't it? Like it's sacred, because when it becomes a personal experience that's happening, that you're experiencing within yourself as a feeling, like you said, I think that's what you're right in saying that, because we need inspiration as well. We need to be inspired. You know, I'm inspired by the greats. I mean, there's so many great thinkers, you know, past and present, that have inspired me in my life, you know, and that inspiration feeds the soul, it feeds the imagination. And you're so right in saying that, Jay. It's so important to have that also being fed to you, to evoke the creative flow state that we can access.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that, you know, where I've listened to, you know, a piece of music, you know, within that piece of music, something in the imagination starts kicking in, which is a good thing. And it's helping you to connect you to your soul again, you know. And like you were saying about the inner world, you know, what I'm beginning to realize more and more my journey is that, you know, this world is a fiction, and, you know, I get to create my own world, really, you know, for myself, you know, and choose, you know, the brothers and sisters that I'm surrounded with and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in this you know, I'm here, you know, living in this avatar, you know, and yeah, but that's how it feels to me. It feels like this world's a fiction, you know. That's how I see it, and I get to choose how to create my own world, you know, for myself. So yeah.
So you are the fact. You are the reality in this realm.
Yes.
So so it's good to be aware of that as well. Because if everything around you can be shaped and molded, but you're always going to be there as you, then you hold on to what's real, which is you. And then all these fake, shifting, temporary things won't change the way you interact. They won't change it. It's unable to traumatize you, so to speak, because you're always going to be you. You're not going to shut yourself down, because you can't shut you down, because you're the only thing that's there, that's present.
Yeah.
So you get to create, you get to have fun, you get to build, you get to have joy, you get to speak, you get to talk, you get to walk, you get to eat, all these things. So it's a beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that, just another thing as well is that you know, we all know about, you know, the narratives that have been put out there all the time, you know. But you know, but again, what's that all there for? They want to keep you away. They just want to keep you away from finding your true self.
They're also triggering your shadows.
And a triggering as well. Yes.
Yeah, because if
they
you are
want
reacting,
you to get triggered.
exactly. You see, they want you to react to their narratives. But this is the thing. You pay attention to their narratives, you're already playing into their hands. And this is the thing, you know. Where are you putting your energy and your attention? If your attention is not on yourself, then and your attention is on, I mean, I'm not saying be completely ignorant of what's going on around you, but I'm saying, like, if you're reacting of what they're doing every time they do something, then you're already falling into their reality tunnels and the reality they want to create for you. Because in the end, what we have power over, we don't have power over the collective. The collective will always exist, because this is part of the game we've got, you know, in a way, not game, but, you know, this is part of the game of life. You know, we are here to individuate and come out of the ignorance of the mass psychosis. And the only way to do that is to create our own and focus on our own lives and what reality we're creating for ourselves and what meaning we're giving to our lives. And you can't find meaning in your life without connecting to your true self, or the inner child, so to speak, because that inner child is the divine creative symbol of the eternal life, you know, and that you won't have wings to go around in your life without that connection. So they traumatize people, and that's why people react in the truth movement, because they don't have an active imagination. Let's just put it that way, because most of the time they're waiting for them. They're almost anticipating it. They're almost like, oh, what will they do next? And it's like your whole life revolves around just the conspiratorial elements of reality, and you're almost addicted to it. It's like you need it for you to even have an identity. You know, have you even worked in yourself? Have you done the inner work? Have you done the shadow work? Have you? And this is the thing. It's like most people haven't, and that's why most people, 90% of people in this truth movement have you know, haven't even done the inner work and are triggered by the narratives of these people that we call the elite. You know, it's like, well, they are the elites for you because they're leading you. They're not my elite. I don't even call them that. You know?
Yeah, to be honest, I've never seen them before, so I don't know who they are. So it's whatever story you want to tell yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, I think about the best sort of description is or one of the ones that I got from you really, Amed, which was enemies of life.
Yeah.
ultimately, because that's just what
they're
it
the
is.
enemies of your life.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
That's
so
it.
they don't want you to live your life. They don't want you to truly feel alive. So what they do is they suck you into their world and their narratives and the collective. The collective is always going to be there. There's always going to be a war. There's always going to be, the collective is going to play out the way it needs to play out. But that shouldn't be your concern. Your concern should be on your life individually right now. What are you doing? Because if you're not bringing more joy and love and creativity and flow into your life, you're not contributing to anything, because the greats always created something, an idea, something that brought more beautiful energy into life and existence and created beauty rather than perpetuated it by giving it the attention. Because what are all these truthers doing? Oh, they're commenting. Okay, that's your contribution to humanity. Going out in the streets and protesting. Look, I used to do it. I'm not judging you, but I'm just saying, that doesn't do anything, because the collective are going to play out. The mere fact that you're holding a sign in front of a government building shows to me where you think power is. It's not in your hands. You think the power is there. Give me my rights. Give me this. You're not going to influence the collective in that way. You can only influence it in your individual way. So yeah, sorry, Jay, I interrupted you there as well.
Yeah. I was going to add, going to their streets in front of their stuff in their world, which they control, when you could be at home controlling your own. It's a distraction. It's always a distraction. I kind of want to mention something bit about psychologically, kind of some things that happen in people's minds as well, because at the end of the day, all these doubts and all these fears and stuff, you've kind of got to accept they're not yours. Because even my personal experience, I've been sitting there and I'm just like, it might rain today. But I didn't think that. It's a programming thought that come up because maybe I've heard it before. Maybe it keeps getting played. It's come to me. And if I notice that, hold on, I didn't actively think that, then the fear just disappears. Because you acknowledge who you are and you acknowledge the programming within the self. And it's something simple as you can go outside and you can look up and you can be like, oh, there's trails in the sky. And then all of a sudden you feel yourself get defeated and you're just like, no. It's everything is where you put your attention. And literally, like you're saying, Ahmed, it's up to you to live your life, and all these things, like watching EastEnders, seeing something happen and you're like, oh, you feel a certain type of way, so you start enacting that behavior with your own family. It's all, is it hypnosis? Is it suggestion?
Yeah, and a lot of these thoughts are not even your own.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Where does thought come from itself? The term thought, where does it come from? Where does these thoughts come from? Because a lot of it isn't our own thoughts. You got to remember that we live in a multi dimensional reality. The ether is not seen. What's in the ether is the thoughts of the collective. When there's certain thoughts, because we're like receivers, we're like antennas as well. The only time that I really know that I'm thinking for myself is while I'm doing something. That's when I know I have my own thoughts. Those are my genuine own thoughts. When I'm sitting still or I'm not moving and, like reacting off something, like you said, you're looking up at a trail and negative thoughts comes in. It's going to, and all of a sudden it ruins your day. It puts a dampener on your day. Yeah. Remember, we live in a holographic world. So all these things, if you're giving them attention, you're giving them, it's going to affect you. They will affect you more than others. If you become the master of your destiny and the master of your sea, right? You become a creator of your own reality. And then you can create, as what Jason Brashear talks about as well, but creating a positive feedback loop is how you take these thoughts. Are these thoughts useful to you? You know, because if they're not feeding you and nourishing you, these thoughts are, let's just say, satanic or void of love. What's that? Sorry. What was that, Jay?
Yeah, they're parasitic. They're parasitic.
Parasitic.
Also, another thing is just to prove they're not your thoughts. You didn't create the language you're speaking, so you had to learn it. So the thoughts that come to you was a phrase spoken to you because you had to learn it. So therefore, they didn't come from you. They were said and taught to you. Because you don't think, because a lot of times when you think, you don't even think out in words. Like when you're walking down the road, you're not thinking left foot, right foot, arm, left foot, right foot. You're not thinking that. You're just flowing. So your thought is so encompassing. If it separates to words, then there's a reason. And it always, like you're saying as well, you'd look up, see something that you would react to, and the reaction and the emotion creates the words to come.
Creates
so it doesn't
that
matter what words,
field. Yeah.
Yeah. Through the feeling of what you're reacting to. It's instant.
This is how mind control works. Because they want the enemies of life, so to speak. They want, they want you to have a negative feedback loop, because then it's easy for them to control you.
Indeed.
Because you're being distracted from your true path, which is the path of creativity and love and positivity. I mean, what's the most scarce thing today? It is positive. Wherever you look in the media, it's negative news. Everything is negative, 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 because that is the default programming we've been given since birth.
Or it is positively negative.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to turn it around that way and look at it as a way to grow from it and take that negativity, because of course sometimes negative things are in our lives through trauma and things, you know, they're negative, but they're positive negatives, because you can turn those things around and outgrow them and integrate them, and because of that you gain wisdom as a result of that healing, you know. So yeah, I think we've covered all the three subjects.
I think we've done well. It's been an absolutely amazing conversation, and I want to thank you, Amed and Jay, for this beautiful podcast and for the time here today. So yeah, just thank you. And I don't know if there's any final words that you'd like to share before we decide to end this podcast. If there's anything else you would like to share?
I'll probably recommend some books perhaps to check out, you know, by Alexander Lowen and Wilhelm Reich, since I've quoted them in you know, in this podcast. So we'll probably include some links there below, or titles of books to look into. But other than that, really enjoyed this podcast. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
So what I would say is something simple you can do is just to always feel yourself and love yourself, because that's the truest gifts you can give yourself. If you love yourself and you can feel yourself at all times, that's the best gift to oneself. That's how I feel. So
beautiful. Yeah.
I'm
feeling grateful.
Yeah, beautifully put.
Yeah, feeling grateful for your
yes,
feeling that gratitude in yourself and your body. Yeah, it's beautiful words. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you. Yeah, beautifully put. Thank you. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to our listeners out there, and yeah, look forward to doing this again sometime in the near future, Amed and Jay. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Much love to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.